Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you back to my history reaction channel, or to it for the first time if this is the first time you've been here. Anyway, today we'll be watching part 2 of World War I Oversimplified. I will include a link to part 1 down in the description below, as well as a link to the original content. I highly encourage you to head over to Oversimplified and let them know that you appreciate what they're doing if you like what you see here. Let's encourage him to keep making these world-class history videos. With that said, if you haven't seen part 1, my reaction, or if you prefer his original content, please check that out before you watch part 2, for obvious reasons. Okay, let's just go ahead and get into part 2 and see where we're going next.
With both sides stuck in a hard stalemate, they knew this war wasn't going to be about taking territory, but about simply wearing each other down.
Right, it's going to be a war of attrition.
The Allies had plenty of men to expend from its overseas dominions, and the British also started a naval blockade, so Germany couldn't import stuff, like food. Neither side really wanted...
Although I don't think they got fast food, I could be wrong.
A long grueling war though, so they both thought of ways to break the deadlock on the Western Front. Idea number 1, new frontiers.
Alright.
The war...
Yeah, so that's taking the war to other territories.
First broke out, Australia was quick to take German New Guinea. The Allies also quickly jumped on Germany's colonies in Africa, and particularly in German East Africa, locals were enlisted as soldiers and carriers by both sides, leading to a tragic loss of life for the native Africans. Some new combatants entered the war as well. The Allies' new friends were Italy and Japan. Japan was busy building itself an empire, so it was more than happy to take away German islands and colonies in East Asia. Italy actually had an alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary before the war.
Right, but it was a defensive alliance. They were only obligated to join the fight on the side of Germany and Austro-Hungarian Empire if they were being invaded. But if they're the aggressors, Italy isn't bound by the treaty.
War. But after some tense relations, and then the Allies promising to give them some of Austria-Hungary's stuff, they switched sides. Italy opened up a front in the mountains here, but like everyone else, they were stuck in stalemate for most of the war. The Central Powers' new friend was a struggling empire in the Middle East. The Ottomans... The Ottoman were divided on whether to actually join the war or not, since they had been exhausted by the recent Balkan Wars. Some of the politicians who did want to join went off on their own and fired some shells at Russia.
Not surprising, Russia and the Ottoman Empire have had a lot of conflicts over history, primarily over access to the Black Sea, but yeah, there's a long history between these two countries. So whenever they have a good excuse, they're going to take a shot at each other.
And then came back and said, whoops, looks like we're at war now. The Ottoman entry into the war was of particular concern to the British, since the Middle East was full of oil, and Britain wanted all of that oil. First, the
British Petroleum Company. It didn't have that name then, but that's what it evolved to.
Tried to attack Russia in the Caucasus Mountains, but they weren't prepared for the cold, and many of them froze to death. Then they crossed miles of desert to take the Suez Canal from the British.
Failed there too.
Then the Allies tried to take the Dardanelles.
If you haven't noticed, the two great empires of this war, Austro-Hungary and the Ottomans, just aren't doing good. And that's not surprising. They were both seriously in decline. They're just not what they used to be.
Gallipoli in a long and hard trench warfare campaign, but that also failed. They blamed their initial losses on the ethnic Armenians living within Ottoman territory, and the resulting Armenian Genocide led to the deaths of 1.5 million people.
Huge tragedy, and I know a lot of people today are trying to deny it, that it ever happened. It happened. There's zero question of that. We can debate over why it happened, how it happened, and all that, but it happened, and it's a horrible tragedy.
Then the Germans sent spies into Afghanistan to try to convince the Arab tribes there to rise up in jihad against the British and attack India. But that plan failed, partly because the spies got bored, brewed their own alcohol, and got drunk, which is a bad thing to do in Afghanistan.
Being in Afghanistan as a foreign army is always a bad idea, period. I said it in another video, but invading Afghanistan never goes well.
All these new frontiers hadn't done much to change the war. Aware that the Allies had more men and supplies than them, the Germans knew they had to do something to break the stalemate. Before the war, there was a big conference that set out the rules of modern warfare. No chemical weapons, no killing civilians, don't be jerks.
Yeah, and that happened a lot in World War II. And not just the Germans. Let's be fair, it was not just the Germans. The Allies did this stuff too.
The Germans held a meeting and decided to be jerks. Zeppelin air raids commenced over British cities. They also started attacking the Allied trenches with chlorine gas, and they used submarines to sink civilian ships.
They did make extensive use of submarine wolf packs. In fact, that was probably the greatest strength of the German Navy. They didn't have a navy that could really compete directly with the British Navy, but the submarines could be very effective.
One such civilian ship was the Lusitania, which had 159 Americans on board when it was sunk, further swaying U.S.
Yeah, to be fair to the Germans, however, the Lusitania was delivering munitions for the war. We know that they had some on the manifest. We know that they had some. That's not really the issue. What we know now, due to archaeological evidence where they visited the remains of the Lusitania, is that it had far more and larger and more powerful than the manifest listed. So the Germans had warned everybody. They had warned everybody that if you're delivering supplies for the war effort, we will sink you. So I have a hard time blaming the Lusitania on the Germans. The people using the Lusitania, not the passengers, I don't really blame them, but the captain and the people who are supplying the munitions, they knew what they were doing. They knew they were putting those civilians in danger.
Opinion against the Germans. Not to be completely unfair to the Germans, the Allies also engaged in chemical warfare soon after, and they had been hiding anti-submarine weapons on their civilian ships, which let the Germans justify their attacks. Meanwhile, Austria-Hungary still hadn't dealt with Serbia, so the Central Powers enlisted some help. Bulgaria wished it was bigger and was still bitter about losing the Second Balkan War. The Central Powers promised to make all of Bulgaria's wildest dreams come true if they helped, so they signed on, and together they knocked out Serbia. The Serbian troops retreated through Albania, which was neutral but had some ties to Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary entered Albania in a friendly invasion to chase down the Serbians, many of whom escaped by sea. It's 1916, and a lot is happening.
Oh yeah.
As if they didn't have enough enemies already, Germany added one more to the list. Portugal had been getting a bit chummy with the Allies behind the scenes, and Germany didn't like that one bit. Around the same time, the only sea battle of the war happened. Both sides had a new powerful class of battleships called dreadnoughts, but they were so expensive to build that neither side wanted to risk losing them in a battle, so they kept them in port, except for one time when they had a big fight and a bunch of them got damaged, so they didn't try that again. The UK started conscripting men to the army, so they had plenty of reserves, which is just as well because the Western Front was about to get brutal. The longest and one of the bloodiest battles of the war started when the Germans launched an attack around the French city of Verdun. The French defended it desperately with hundreds of thousands of casualties. Under pressure, the French called on its allies to do something to draw the Germans' attention away, so the British started their own long and brutal fight, the Battle of the Somme, with 60,000 British casualties on just the first day. It was also here that the British first used one crazy brand new piece of sci-fi technology. The Russians had been getting pushed back further and further into their own territory, but in response to the French call for help, they began a huge offensive, and did really well.
Okay, this is a little misleading. Yeah, the Russians along the whole front did start pushing back, but the Brusilov Offensive is referring specifically to this southern part, where General Brusilov is going to, through brilliant tactics, excellent strategy, going to break through the Austro-Hungarian lines and push deep into Austro-Hungarian territory. If he had had support, he could have probably knocked Austro-Hungary out of the war. As it was, he definitely provides a distraction to draw forces away from the Western Front. He also helps bring Romania into the war on the Allied side.
Until they ran out of supplies and got stuck. Seeing how well the Russians had been doing, Romania decided now would be a great time to jump in and win the war. And then they got pounded. The Greeks were fighting amongst themselves about whether to join the war or not.
Right.
The king liked the Central Powers, while the Prime Minister wanted to join the Allies. After a brief national schism, during which the country split into two, the king finally abdicated and the country reunited. With Allied help, they began a new offensive. In the Middle East, Russia was pushing into Ottoman territory from the north. The British had also made a landing in Mesopotamia to protect Persia's oil fields, and they had also sent a small army up the Tigris River to try to take Baghdad, but the army got sieged in the town of Kut along the way, and eventually surrendered. A new offensive was launched from the south with all-out desert warfare. The offensive was aided by one famous British officer, better known as Lawrence of Arabia.
T.S. Lawrence of Arabia,
who helped lead the Arab tribes in a revolt that wreaked havoc on the Ottoman supply lines.
Yeah, and they were supposed to, in return for that, the Arabs that were supporting the British were supposed to get their own states after the war. British never came through on that, which helps heighten the tensions in the Middle East.
By the time 1917 rolled around, everyone was exhausted. There were mutinies in the French army, the German populace was starving, and the war had drained all of Russia's supplies. There was no clear winner, and it was still anyone's war. The only question now was, who was going to break first?
Russia.
And the answer was Russia. Tired of not eating, and mad that a crazy magic homeless...
Yeah, the February Revolution, a lot of that had to do with bread riots, food shortages. Yes, the Bolsheviks were there. Lenin and his guys were agitating for revolution, but the February Revolution caught them by surprise. If you read some of the journals of some of the Bolsheviks, including men like Trotsky, for example, they mentioned that this was very shocking to them that the revolution is breaking out in February. In fact, Trotsky, I believe it was Trotsky, specifically mentions that some of the Bolshevik forces actually fought against the February Revolution because they tried to undermine it because they weren't ready yet. This isn't the right revolution. This isn't the revolution that we want. So interesting times. But also, if you read like letters from the officers in the field during World War I from Russia, you'll see that a lot of them were very concerned about the state of their family back home, because what they were hearing was that their family was starving. So there's a lot of concern in Russia. It's not, a lot of people give the Bolsheviks too much credit, I think, for this stage of the revolution. They are certainly the driving force of the October Revolution. But I think the February Revolution would have happened with or without the Bolsheviks. There were too many other things going on at that time. And again, reading some of the diaries and journals for some of these officers make it clear that they were very worried about what was going on back home. That they were worried for their families because of food shortages. And there were bread riots, even before this revolution, breaking out throughout Russia. And that was a big part of the riots of the women's factory workers, which were followed by the men factory workers. Yeah, they later added other issues, but their initial issue was, we need food. We're starving. We're working hard. Sons and brothers and fathers are all off at war, and here at home we are starving. Something's got to change.
I was calling some of the shots. There was an uprising in Petrograd,
Rasputin
with riots and strikes. The riots turned into a full-scale revolution, and a new government overthrew the Tsar. Then a few months later, the Bolsheviks overthrew the new government, and they pulled Russia out of the war. This was great news for Germany.
Not immediately. In fact, one of the big reasons that the October Revolution is successful is because the February Revolution that they were going to pull out of the war, they didn't. So that helped keep the people agitated against everything. The Bolsheviks also take a little while to get out, but they do get out.
Germany, who now only had to focus on the Western Front. But there was still one problem. The pesky United States of America was looking increasingly like it was going to join the war. America had been selling supplies to the Allies throughout the war.
Yeah, when I say join the war, we'd already been in it, but we were in it by supplying materials. And yes, we got rich off of it. Not only because of the money we're getting from supplying these materials, but all these economies over in Europe and Asia are being wrecked by this war, which helps boost us up to number one.
Rich off the back of it, meaning it was in fantastic shape and was dangerous to the Germans.
Right.
So Germany sent a telegram to Mexico saying, wouldn't it be crazy cool if you guys attacked America? But
yeah, that's a Zimmerman telegram. And yeah, it is the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's hardly the only thing going on, but it's at that point where enough is enough. Would Mexico have done it? I doubt it. But just the fact that we knew the Germans were trying to get Mexico to invade us was enough.
The British intercepted the message, showed it to the Americans, and that was the final straw. American troops began shipping out to Europe. This was terrible news for Germany, and they knew their only hope now was to force France and the UK to surrender before the fresh American troops arrived. It was now or never, so they started one final attack. They converged their troops and hit hard at the Somme and pushed the Allies back. They hit a second time further north, then again and again. With each hit, the Germans were spending more and more resources, while the Allies were getting better.
That's the problem with making these last-minute pushes. They're gambles. Breakthrough, or you're going to run out of everything.
And better at repelling their attacks. By the fifth punch, the Allies held the line and even pushed back. With American troops now arriving in larger numbers, the Allies launched a counterattack, and that was it. The Central Powers were being pushed back on all fronts. Bulgaria collapsed first, followed by the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary, and finally on November 11, 1918, at 11 o'clock, Germany surrendered. At the peace treaty, Germany was forced to reduce its military, accept war guilt, and pay the bill for the war. After indescribable suffering and millions dead,
Look at those, look at those casualties. Amazing. Just horrifying, really.
the world learnt its lesson and never had such an awful war again for about 20 years.
Right. Yeah, so World War II is a direct consequence to this. So at some point in the fairly near future, we'll go ahead and take a look at Oversimplified World War II. Until then, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoy what I'm doing. I do apologize if my voice is kind of weak and scratchy and kind of fades in and out. A lot of wildfires going on this time of year. I live in a valley, a mountain valley. A lot of the smoke gets trapped here, and it just does a number on me. So it is what it is. Thank you for your patience. Bye-bye.